Senator Embry, Senator Hornback, Senator Smith, Senator Storm, Senator Turner,
Here.
Senator Wheeler, Senator Wilson,
Here.
Senator Wise,
Present.
Senator Yates, Representative Branscombe,
Present.
Representative Bratcher,
Here.
Representative Bridges, Representative Dixon,
Present.
Representative Fleming,
Here.
Representative Hale,
Here.
Representative Heverin,
Present.
Representative Regina Huff, Representative Thomas Huff,
Here.
Representative Lewis,
Here.
Representative Maddox, Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative McPherson,
Here.
Representative Miller,
Here.
Representative Palumbo, here. Representative Santoro, Representative Smith,
Here.
Representative Stevenson, here. Representative Tackett Lafferty,
Present.
Representative Thomas,
Present.
Representative Westrom, Representative Wheatley,
Here.
Co-Chair Higdon,
Here.
Chairman Upchurch.
Here. We do have a quorum. We're duly constituted to do business. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Senator Higdon for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a special guest with me today. My grandson David's in the back of the room there. He resides in Oldham County, and I'd ask the committee to make him feel welcome.
Next, I will recognize Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, the 95th District is in mourning. We are heartbroken for our first responders, and we are grieving for the families of the fallen officers in Floyd and Pike counties. And we are concerned for our injured officers who are still healing from the tragedy that happened in the city of Allen over the past few days. So I'd just like to ask for a brief moment of silence in honor of our fallen officers, William Edward Petrie, Ralph Harlow Frazier, Jacob Russell Chaffins, and our canine service dog, Drago. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Tackett Lafferty. Our thoughts and prayers and our hearts go out to the families of the fallen. Next is Representative Heverin.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to recognize Representative McPherson. Today is his 57th birthday.
I'm sure he appreciates you letting everyone know how old he is.
It's on Facebook.
Okay, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Just remind everyone to silence your cell phone. And the staff wanted me to remind that the staff has moved offices. They're no longer located down in the catacombs of the basement, but they have moved up to the penthouse on the 4th floor into room 493 of the annex. So if you need them, they'll be in room 493. And then again, I'll go ahead and we'll do that at the end. We'll let everyone know when the next meeting is. So, all right, next item on the agenda is the approval of the June 2nd minutes. Do I hear a motion? Got a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. All right. Next item on the agenda is the presentation of the state's electrical vehicle infrastructure deployment plan. We got John Moore, the Assistant State Highway Engineer for Project Development, Transportation Cabinet. Please introduce yourselves once you get situated there for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Representative. My name is John Moore. I serve as, well, for today's purposes, I serve as the Cabinet Lead for EV infrastructure deployment. Along with me is Justin Harrod.
Good afternoon, Representatives. My name is Justin Hare with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and I am the Planning Lead.
Today, be sharing with you what our initial proposal for the electric infrastructure deployment plan. I say initial because we anticipate this being updated routinely over the 5-year life of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funding, or NEVI funding. Between updates, we will continue to receive inputs from all sectors, and we'll incorporate that into future updates. So first, I want to share with you a little bit about the parameters that come with the NEVI funding. These are the federal requirements or federal guidelines. First, the goal. The goal of the NEVI funding is to develop a convenient, reliable, affordable, and equitable national EV charging network. The initial focus is to deploy fast chargers along the interstates to support long-distance travel. That's one of the major impediments to EV adoption. Next, for Kentucky, we're scheduled to receive $69.5 million of federal funds over 5 years to support that effort. Initially in fiscal year 22, $10.3 million is available. The total with the match is 86.9. This is, as with most federal funding, this requires a 20% non-federal match. An emphasis of this program was that private funds could be used to match these federal funds, which emphasizes the intent for this to be a privately operated system and not publicly owned. The initial rollout of the funds is to build out the alternative fuels corridor. This is the designated corridors throughout the nation. This is the initial rollout of fast chargers along that. In order to build out those corridors, it requires 4 150 kilowatt ports. That's one station at least every 50 miles along each corridor. In order to access the funding, we have to have a federally approved by the Joint Office, Joint Transportation and Energy Office. Once that's scheduled to be approved by the end of September. That's the commitment out of the Joint Office. At that point, we should have access to the first 2 years of federal funds, which is a little over $20 million, $20 to $24 million. To make sure there's a lot of activity, a lot of movement in the EV industry. So just to set the stage for what we are and what we're not talking about, there's 3 levels of EV charging. Level 1 is the charger that comes with your new EV. This is a plug in the wall. This is a trickle charger, if you will, at-home charging. This requires multiple days to fully charge a vehicle, but it's really to top off a vehicle overnight. Level 2 charging is often called destination charging. This is the types that you'd have at your office or at a community location. This is where you anticipate you're going to spend a few hours at this location, and you'd plug in while you do whatever activity. These generally require about 10 hours for a full charge, but generally a full charge is not required when you visit one of these. The focus of the initial rollout of the NEVI funds is on fast charging. This is the also called DCFC, or direct current fast charging. These are estimated to give you a full charge in about 30 minutes. These are the really associated with the interstate, so really ubiquitous with rolling in on empty and filling up your gas tank. With the NEVI funding, the requirement is to fully build out the alternative fuels corridor. As I mentioned, that's 450 kilowatt ports every 50 miles along those designated corridors. Once that is certified by the joint office, then we can move into community charging or level 2 charging or other types. I'll get into that a little bit more in detail. So wanted to delve into a little bit how we developed this, how we coordinated this. Of course, the deployment plan is being led by KYTC, but without the Energy and Environmental Cabinet, the Public Service Commission, and Federal Highway Administration, we would not be where we are today. Beyond that, we also coordinated extensively with economic development, finance, tourism, workforce development on various aspects of the plan. Even beyond this, these entities, we coordinated with over 100 interested entities from various sectors of the Commonwealth and beyond, including the automobile industry, utility operators, interested parties, both from interest groups as well as private companies, as well as local and state agencies. Input from all of these representatives was imperative to develop this plan. Such involvement continues. In fact, we're having meetings later this week, and we continue that will grow through the life of this plan. The goal of Kentucky's EV plan is to facilitate EV access through every corner of the state. So the NEVI focuses on interstates, but the interstates was not sufficient for Kentucky. They don't provide the intrastate connectivity. So it's obvious to expand that to include the parkway system in Kentucky, which is Kentucky's interstates. Beyond that, there were still significant gaps within this fast charging network. We proposed a number of corridors to help fill in these gaps. These are the corridors noted in orange. Note that the initial funding is limited just to the interstates and parkways, and this does not include the potential community charging that would be beyond the fast charging aspect. So, as I mentioned, the initial rollout, the initial activity you'll see associated with this program will be along our interstates and parkways. It's estimated that this will take 2 to 3 years of available funding to roll this out, and beyond that, then we'll be able to move into other sectors. So this map is where you'll see the most activity over the first 2 to 3 years of the program. To accentuate that somewhat, after we completely build out the alternative fuels corridor, the map that I showed just previously, we will certify the joint office will certify that we have completed build out of that corridor. Then we can move into what we're calling phase 3 and phase 4 of the program. Phase 3 is where we will deploy fast chargers along the other priority corridors, the corridors shown in orange. Phase 4 is where we'll start looking at community and destination chargers. These are the level 2 chargers that are really going up all over the place now. Along with that, want to note that these corridors, they're very draft, so open to any and all comment between now and when we begin building on them here 2 to 3 years from now. Kentucky's implementation strategy, our initial deployment is anticipated to meet the demand that we forecast for 2026. What we're looking to do is strategically deploy that so that the infrastructure below ground will meet what the demand will be in 2030, and the equipment above ground will meet the demand in 2026. That allows future-proofing to an extent of the rollout, as well as allow for more cost-effective upgrades. This approach does require an approval from the joint office, and as we move forward with this, This is subject to change as well as we get more information from the industry, more information from the public, as well as more guidance from the feds, which has been unfortunately slow to roll out. So I'm sure you're all asking, where will these be deployed? Well, we don't know yet. The locations are not specified within our plan because we feel that that's important for the private sector to help guide that. So we've intentionally left that open for coordination with the private sector to identify the best places for those to be. What we have done is we have helped guide that conversation to identify where priority and suitability, and I'll get a little bit more in detail with that in a minute. Well, let's go ahead and move into that. This is very consistent with a lot of what other states are doing. There's very few that are getting site-specific, and some are almost planning to plan, so they have not gone into the detail that we have today. So some of the factors that we will be looking at to consider for deployment: one, to ensure geographic distribution and appropriate coverage throughout the Commonwealth, is distance to compliant or fast chargers out there now, both as they come online and those that are existing today. Other elements to consider, part of the eligibility is to ensure equitable distribution of the impacts of this. And so with that, we'll be looking at rural locations as well as Justice 40 or underrepresented populations. Miles of corridor coverage, that just, it's two birds with one stone, essentially. Where we have junctions of interstates and parkways or concurrent highways, you get more bang for your buck if you deploy along those areas. The next two, intersecting road traffic and predicted long-distance trips, that's essentially looking at demand, both demand on the corridor as well as cross-traffic that may utilize these locations. Where there's high demand, it makes sense to deploy stations. Presence of amenities, whoever uses these sites is likely going to spend 20, 30 minutes, and they need something to do while they're, we all have similar when we go to a filling station and need to walk around. And of course, the last element that we're looking at is power availability and reliability. You have to have power to the site, you have to have convenient power to the site. And that includes three-phase power availability, the maximum voltage the system can support, and the number of substations in the area. Next up, ownership and contracting. Similar to many states, Kentucky's not proposing to own these EV stations. We're proposing to, the intent of the program seems to be, and Kentucky's moving along with that, for this to support and roll out the private adoption of EV stations, and so that's the focus moving forward. As far as the contracting method, we've looked at a number of contracting methods. We're leaning toward a public-private partnership based on the feedback we've gotten. Some states have experience with grant programs, and they're unwieldy to govern, especially one of this magnitude. This is very much draft as we move forward. We're looking at a number of working sessions with the industry to help define both the contracting method and the terms of those contracts to make sure when we roll these out, they're attractive to the industry. Lastly, looking at our schedule, looking to begin to roll these out this fall, and hope to have the first stations come online next spring. This is all subject to, of course, supply chain issues. There's a lot of states that are going to be hitting the market looking for these chargers around the same time. So we anticipate there's going to be, there may be some issues there. We haven't heard of any yet, but nobody has had their plans approved yet. As of right now, we're already hearing some 9 to 12 month lead times, and so we're monitoring that and determining how that may affect the schedule. Along with that, there's federal rulemaking that's outstanding as we speak, and that's going to guide both the schedule and the nature of the deployment. So that's the long and short of what we had to share with you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to entertain any questions if you have them.
Okay, I think we do have a few questions. Just one right off the top of my head. What, have you talked to the providers as we move forward with this over the next few years? Obviously, it's not going to be that big of a demand now, but 5-10 years down the road, how are the how is that going to affect the electrical grid and the demand? What are your power companies telling you about you being able to provide? How's that going to affect them?
Yes, sir. We have had extensive conversations with a number of sectors in the power industry, and they're not concerned with the power demand that's out there now. There may be I won't say it won't be seamless, but as of right now, it would take a very rapid adoption, which is not forecast for Kentucky, to really have a tremendous impact on the electric grid. It's going to be similar to a lot of the adoptions of technology, as it will be a slow adoption and it will be a slow impact, is what we're hearing.
Okay, thank you. Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Wheeler is watching online, and he had the same question as Representative Upchurch, and simply we want to know if had sufficient, if Kentucky electrical infrastructure was sufficient enough to meet the challenge, and I think that is a legitimate question, one that we'll continue to be asking. I was curious, you mentioned PPP, public-private partnerships, and as we go, this 50-mile corridor have a station every 50 miles. How do you foresee determining who gets that? Because there's going to be a lot of folks. There's going to be winners and losers. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people seeking that to have one of those charging stations in the beginning.
That is a process to be determined. We anticipate bundling these to an extent so that they're perhaps deployed a corridor at a time. So there's potentially multiple vendors that will be vying for those deployments. Additionally, this represents the publicly supported deployment. Beyond that, deployment can occur on its own, and the demand we see on a lot of the interstates within 5 to 10 years, they will require more than what this program will roll out, and so that there is an opportunity for the marketplace to fill in where this market these funds do not touch.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up? I guess and you probably haven't discussed this yet, but it's still something that. What type of participation would you do with in a public-private PPP, public-private partnership? How would that look?
You are correct. We haven't gotten that far. It has been quite a sprint to get this plan completed by this point. There's a lot of states that unfortunately are requesting extensions to get there. So that's the focus of our next efforts, to really dial in on the contracting piece. We just started really cracking that nut over the past month. So unfortunately, I don't have anything to give you now.
Thank you.
Senator Yates, did you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. It's exciting. This is our future. I filed a bill this last year just to look at some of the matching as far as with the EV purchases to match the federal, that to incentivize the use. We know that in 4 to 7 years, Kentucky being a logistic hub, that we're going to need to be on grid in order to not lose that economic impact that's coming through. So, but I do also know that we're kind of late to the game. I know that we're filing because some of our competing states have already applied and they're moving forward. So we're dealing with some supply and demand because we're going to be a year out once we get this done, once we get the RFP through budget. My concern is that Well, I guess this is the benefit. One of the benefit of being so late to the game is, like most things in Kentucky, we get to learn from other states' mistakes. And we've watched some of the monopolies that's happened other places. So hopefully when we're doing the P3, we'll make sure that we don't have one or two buying up all the license like you sometimes see with liquor license. They'll kind of hold it in and it brings the cost or restricts that access. But one of my just looking at the concerns is when you were talking about the different stages we have. I know if I fly out west, they're replacing, you see over and over, the 30-minute hubs so they can get in and out. Replacing with, the ones, they have the longer stations. I guess it's like 8-hour stations or 10-hour stations. So they're already moving to this new upgraded technology. I would hate for Kentucky to come in and implement old technology at a high cost. It just doesn't make economic sense for someone who's traveling to park their car that long. It does at their home or maybe their business, right. But at these stations, I would hopefully would be using the newest technology so that we're not 5 years behind the others.
And generally, it's a different type of technology between the fast charging, which is the 30-minute, versus the level 2 charging, which is the all day, if you will. So it's a different type of customer, and majority of charging we anticipate is going to be done at home rather than at one of these. This is really to promote interstate travel and facilitate interstate travel.
Okay, and my follow-up with that, so what we're talking about implementing on the interstate, they would be the fast charging stations. We wouldn't expect somebody to sit there for 8 to 10 hours or to get a charge. These will all be the newest technology.
That is correct, and that is a requirement of the program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Yes, I understand that this is a work in progress, but I couldn't help but notice that your rollout plan leaves Eastern Kentucky off of the map. Can you explain that? I do understand that recently we received good funding in the road plan to expand the Mountain Parkway through Prestonsburg, but we're obviously concerned about getting these types of resources to people in Floyd and Pike counties as well. Are you taking that into account for future possibilities?
Yes. Absolutely, ma'am. And the intent was to roll out along the interstates and parkways initially, and then roll into the other priority corridors, which does more extensively touch Eastern Kentucky. And that was for two reasons. One, interstates helped us analyze locations where, or interchanges helped us analyze where the priorities and suitabilities of locations a little bit easier because it's more defined. On surface streets beyond the parkway system, it's a different animal, and we were not ready to look at that as extensively. There are opportunities in coordination with the Energy and Environmental Cabinet where they have VW settlement funds that they're looking to deploy in conjunction with these funds, and they may look at some of those corridors to roll out ahead of when the federal funds will be available.
So you will be taking into account as the expansion of the parkway,
Yes,
as
ma'am.
it is expanded. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Representative Hebron.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation today. I greatly appreciate it. I do want to say I'm thrilled to hear that you all are going to involve the private sector. I think in kind of some beginning conversations, there was talk about utilizing our current rest stops, and I had a lot of concern about that, just for safety reasons, but also I think that if we can get the private sector involved, it alleviates some of the money that the government's going to have to provide. Which brings me to my main concern about this is I'm looking at the drafting fund plan, and it says that the federal government's going to provide $86.9 million, with our match being $17.4 million, which is very common. But where is that money going to come from? The road fund, or the matching money?
As of right now, the matching funds were anticipated to be provided by the private sector,
Okay.
and it's anticipated to avoid deployments that are abandoned. We want the whoever hosts these to have a little bit of skin in the game, just to have a sense of ownership and responsibility.
So I guess that would be a question I would just want to follow up on, because I don't think I realize that that private sector money could be matching for the federal government?
That it's actually unique to this program that
Okay.
private sector money can be used as a match. So.
Okay. And just, kind of in this time period with inflation being so much, and I think there's a lot of concern with freezing the 2-cent gas tax with the amount of money that's going to lose the state and our roads to be able to have better infrastructure. What happens when that money, with the inflation, everything's going up. So what happens when this cost is going to be more? Because ultimately it will. Because just like the road plan, it's already got way overfunded just with the cost of materials. So what's your all's plan for that?
We have tried to incorporate we have tried to overestimate the cost of initial deployment to take some of that into consideration. We recognize that when a whole lot of people come to market at the same time, which is what's going to happen with this plan, that there will be upward pressure on prices. Additionally, there's Buy America considerations, which has not been a factor to date in EV chargers. So understanding that and figuring out what the pressure on prices on that as well is to be honest, is still somewhat of an unknown. So we recognize that that's part of the reason we don't know the size of the phase 3 and phase 4, because in order to get to that, we have to build out the alternative fuels corridor. So that will be our focus for the first couple of years. And as we get some of that feedback from the rollout, then we'll be able to update that to anticipate how far these funds will go.
Okay, and then one follow-up question, if it's okay. I was reading about it has to be every spaced at less than 50 miles, which is kind of funny, thinking if you're going through rural Kentucky, you recognize that you might not see a gas station for 50 miles. Have you all already looked at the, with the map, looking at the interstate, and which I guess the interstates are different, but looking at the parkways and freeways across Kentucky, is that realistic to have a charging station less than every 50 miles?
We've looked at it. It's not unreasonable.
Okay.
So it's we're in a much better shape than some of the western states where you can go 100 miles without seeing.
Awesome.
So we do have the framework in place for that.
Thank you. I know there's a lot of still questions, so I appreciate the answers
I've
that
got
you
plenty
provided.
myself. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Senator Higdon real quick to clarify some budgetary.
I just want to follow up with you on the match, the state match. We did budget in our budget $17 million general fund dollars for the federal match. So and hopefully there be some money that you do require from these private partners, but the federal match is included in the budget.
Yes, sir.
$17 million.
We're looking at that, and we haven't yet determined how best to allocate that toward the success of the program. But we're looking at potential areas where a station may not be marketable initially, where some of those funds may be best to allocate towards that deployment to ensure the success, at least as it's being stood up. But we do recognize and appreciate that those funds being out there. We have not yet fully vetted where best would be the best way to roll those out.
Yeah, I'm not privy to what the legislative intent was on how that money was be used, but I do know that it was allocated for the federal match, along with $250 million for our mega projects.
Yes, sir.
That was in the general fund budget. Thank you.
Senator Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate you all being here today explaining this. And I'm just trying to clarify a little bit more about 23 and 119 intersect up there at Pikeville, and Pennsylvania is loaded with people coming that direction down to 23 going all the way. 23 is a 4-lane road going into Virginia. It comes down and hits 119. It comes down and connects us to 25. So is it my understanding that all the federal funds are strictly limited to the interstate?
They're restricted to the designated alternative fuels corridor, which currently in Kentucky we have proposed to be the interstates and parkways. Once those corridors are built out, then those funds can be extended beyond that to other priority highways, of which 23 is one that we've identified.
And is 80 that, I travel from Harlan to go to Owensboro and that way, and I'm on 80% of the time just when I get on 75 at Corbin. and jump off up at London. So is 80 also
The
in that parkway that's going to be?
yes, sir. Between Bowling Green and London is part of that AFC network.
Okay, and is there a time frame when the people in eastern Kentucky can have some knowledge that 23 will be considered?
Unknown at this time. It really depends on how the lead times on the program and how quickly we can get contracts stood up and implemented. So look forward to updating you in the future on our schedule.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Odell Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In doing your research and looking at all these different numbers and the cost, have you looked at an average cost of a vehicle for a year? Maybe adding, I would assume that you're looking at taxes for road programs for our loss of taxes off of the gasoline. You're looking at some sort of revenue off of the electric car to subsidize our costs for transportation needs. I'm sure you've got those numbers probably down somewhere, but have you looked at what the average family would pay for an electric vehicle, for that tax, the cost of electric? And I don't mean to differ with you on the usage of electric, but when I'm hearing them tell us to turn our thermostats up to 70 and 72 right now because of a shortage of electric, I can't see where adding an additional burden on our grid is not going to be effective, for a shortage. So I don't mean to disagree with you that. I'm sure you're a lot smarter in looking at what electric is out there, but I'm listening to what's already happening. And I'm more of a proponent on a hybrid than I am 100% electric, just due to the fact that I think the transition is going to be a lot longer than what people anticipate, mostly on a grid that you're talking about, the infrastructure. When you talk about 3-phase and 4-phase, you're talking about a considerable amount of electricity. Mm-hmm. So, again, I don't mean to differ with you, but I'm just saying that I look for a shortage in that end. But going back to what I was saying on the cost, have you come up with a number that that's going to be needed on each car to subsidize the loss of our gasoline tax? Have you come up with an idea?
We have not come up with a dollar figure per electric vehicle. What we have looked at is actually fuel efficiency would have a more significant impact on the road fund than adoption of EVs, at least in the short term. So we can look at that and try and get a number for you if you'd like that.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. It's not that I'm looking for one, but I would think transportation should be looking for one.
We are
because of the need. We still have a lot of roads to do, a lot of upkeep, and those vehicles are going to have to be paying for that, either through a usage tax one time a year or a subsidy tax. Some sort of revenue has to come in to substitute the loss of our gas tax. Are we on the same page there?
Yes,
don't
sir.
You think so?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If that is something that you could come up with here in the interim, I think it's been tried to be addressed, Mr. Chairman, on what that formula is going to be. So it'd be good if the cabinet could come up with a recommendation rather than leaving it on us to try to figure it out, because I can't tell you what it would be on an electric vehicle. Don't have one, so I don't know what the loss is. But I know I'm paying it when I fill up my truck. I'm paying the tax then. So,
Yes,
and one more follow-up, Mr. Chairman. If the cabinet's determination is to put these throughout the state, these charging stations, as you call it, and it's going to be important for the transition to electric cars, who is going to guarantee, is the state going to take on the responsibility, saying that we're going to be able to get you from one end of the state to the other? Is that a determination, or is it going to be to where everybody's on, right now you're on your own. If you take off and you want to go on a trip and it's a long journey, say to Florida, you have to map out your charging stations if you have an electric car. Is that correct? You'd have to map that out.
That's my understanding. I also do not own an EV. So.
Again, I'm going by hearsay.
Yes, sir.
But the hearsay that I hear right now is the fact that
$60.
they're trying to map this out, but that doesn't mean that the station's going to be available. It may already be booked up. Is this something that you've heard of too? If, in other words, if I take a trip in an electric car fully electric and I map it out, I have to call for reservations. Am I hearing this right, or is that something, or is the infrastructure better than I'm thinking on traveling right now?
In the short term, where there's a limited supply of chargers, that is the current framework as I understand it. I'm not extensively familiar with that, but the goal of the program is to where EV charging is as ubiquitous as gasoline stations. So
okay, the last question is, if I read it right, it's about 6 cents on a home charging system right now is a typical fee to use. I mean, a number, but I heard that on the road in a charging station, a quick station, is more like 35 cents. Is that? Are you familiar with any cost of charge?
I know that in conversations with utilities, it varies significantly from utility to utility, depending on where you are in the state. I don't know. I don't have those specific.
So you don't have an average cost of a charging station right now for a person?
I do not.
You call it a quick charge. I'm sure
fast charge,
the
yes.
home version is a slow charge.
Yes, sir.
So, but you don't have any idea what the average cost is then?
I'm sure we can get it to you. We have folks that know that, but I do not.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Senator Higdon for some budgetary analysis.
I'm just going to update. We did have a lot of discussion this session about the what to charge on electric vehicles. And in fact, it changed so much that we put the implementation off till 2024, so we'd have another year to talk about it. But the consensus we came up with was $120 user fee for electric vehicles per year and $60 user fee for hybrids. Also, for the charging stations, commercial charging stations, we're going to collect a 3-cent user fee for each kilowatt hour. Now, that doesn't count what the facility will charge for electricity. The state's going to receive 3 cents per kilowatt hour in addition to that. So that is in a bill we passed this time, and like I said, we'll be talking about it a lot this session because that was a compromise. But as other states start to roll this out, we don't have any problem copying off somebody. I think if they've got a good plan, we can take a look at it.
Absolutely.
Senator Berg, finally get to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir. I don't know how well this analogy is going to hold, but my concern when we start talking about public-private partnerships takes me back to my old district, Oldham County, where when cable came in, the cable companies were willing to go so far. And then that's as far as they wanted to go because they lost their profitability margins beyond that. Do we have a way to ensure with this public-private partnership either a requirement or a directive of some sort that the expectation is you're going to go a little bit beyond your expected profit margins here because this is an infrastructure that we have to build out? Is there a way to put that into this partnership as an expectation on the private sector that there's going to be additional miles that are not going to be as financially profitable, but the expectation is that you're going to do that work as well?
So, to echo what Senator Higdon has, we're not ashamed of copying off of those that have gone before us, and some of the framework that we've heard from other states is where they will bundle more profitable stations with more with other stations to make that a package to be delivered in conjunction. So I would offer that, one, we have not dug into to the point that we are certain that that is the process we're going to use, and all of these nuances. Please share those concerns with us so we can look into them as we move forward, because we do want a successful deployment in Kentucky, and I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Okay, Representative Huff.
You had mentioned that there's going to be charging stations every 50 miles.
That is the federal requirement, yes, sir.
And I was wondering if you know how many individual chargers will be at each facility?
So the federal requirement requires 4 chargers at each station. So 4 chargers every 50 miles.
4 chargers for each facility?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the other question I had, I think has already been asked, was how much it would cost to charge a car on a fast charger for 30 minutes.
And that, as of right now, I couldn't tell you that. There's a lot of different factors that roll into that, such as something that I've never heard of before, which I can't think of, the demand charge, which is the how heavy a load that you put on that system. That essentially sets the overhead charge for that station for the balance of the month. So it can be substantial when you're just rolling out. Initially the charges may be more until the business gets booming, and that may be in an area where it would make sense to subsidize that to identify where it's going to be. But I don't have a specific number for you. I apologize.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we've got one last question from Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And mine is a little bit of just a caution question. This is something I've been very interested in. I have some friends that have invested out west, and I think they got hit in the nose on some problems. And I think you see some states have made the mistake, and you can call it a mistake or not, they pay the price. That anytime you have to incentive where there's no profit, taxpayers are going to pay for that difference. We know that. And so we want to make sure, I would think at least, to look at the economic impact. Again, Kentucky, we're a logistic hub. We're trying to get people to come to Kentucky to locate here so we can have that positive economic impact and stop being a poor state. We want to raise that up. And we know that in 4 to 7 years that most of it is going to be dependent on this grid to do so. So I would hope that that's part of our equation. A huge part of our equation is looking to make sure that we're invested in stations that will help amplify the economic impact as we're traveling. Sometimes too many politicians, we get into it and we talk about my district, my this and whatnot, but we all boats rise with the tide. So if we can increase the positive economic engine of Kentucky, if we can increase that and we can make sure there's more money coming into it, then we actually have more money to incentivize and do these other things. So when you said bundling, we talked about, I remember when we did One Touch in Louisville, I was president of the council then, and I was arguing really hard. I wanted to make sure my district got the expanded internet connection. I want to make sure the things, they sat down and they said, we can do it, it's just going to cost you a whole lot more money because there's no profit. So I think that's something we have to go into. We want to make sure that if we're investing, we're doing that expansion, we also want to take into consideration the private market and the economic impact that some of that logistics travel will come into. And I'm sure we will. I just wanted to point that out to my colleagues as well, because this is a long-term approach. We'll have an initial rollout. We'll hopefully have some economic advantage that we don't get passed around, because we're slow coming to this. And if we don't get in a hurry, we don't get into place, they're going to go around us. And that whole advantage of where we're essentially located at and being this logistic hub, and we're seeing some of the advantages of new jobs and the battery plants and UPS and all that, in the event that we fall behind, if Kentucky falls behind, we're going to lose that. And so I'm glad that I know you understand the importance of this being a race to get in place, but we know our other states are competing with us because they would like to be able to use that logistics.
And if I may, there are a number of states that are out in front of us as far as deployment. I think as far as the implementation of this guidance, we're amongst the leading edge thanks to Justin's work through this past 6 months, and that makes me feel comfortable where we're at moving forward. Another thing you mentioned regarding logistics, one big variable out there is the freight industry, whether they go electric or hydrogen or some other fuel, and the future impact of this funding pot to help support that. So that's something we're keeping in mind, and that's something we'll have to update you in the future because the industry still hasn't decided. But we may not be the leaders in the country, but I think we're the best of the rest.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting and informative. It kind of makes you wonder about the stress that Henry Ford had when he was building the Model T, and how all those Model Ts were going to get gasoline so that they could travel the roads. And I bet he thought it would have been nice back then to have all that government money building those stations out. So
absolutely,
it's going to be interesting. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, sir.
We'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is something that I know some of our folks in Louisville are quite interested in, is the use of reformulated gas, RFG, in the Commonwealth. We have with us Michael Kennedy, Melissa Duff, and Rachel Hamilton. If you all would please proceed. Introduce yourselves for the record, and you may proceed.
Hello, I'm Michael Kennedy. I'm the Director for the Division for Air Quality.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Hamilton, and I'm the Director of the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control District.
You may proceed. And I said that Melissa was here, but she's not here. Thank you.
Let's see. Oh, is that already on? Sorry about that. All right. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to give a history of RFG in Kentucky and its impacts. So first, start out with DAQ's mission statement. We are here to protect human health and the environment by achieving and maintaining acceptable air quality. All right. So federal EPA set national ambient air quality standards for 6 criteria of pollutants. Today we're going to talk about ozone. Ozone is formed with NOx and VOC and sunlight. Chemical reaction creates ozone, so it's not a source that's emitting ozone, but sources that are emitting VOC and NOx, and it has a chemical reaction that produces ozone. And it's, so I guess 2 things. Ozone, there's the ozone layer that's up in the sky in the stratosphere, and that's a good thing. That protects the planet from UV radiation. Ozone on the ground level, us breathing in, that's not a good thing. So in 1990 Clear Air Act amendments, EPA had requirements for areas that had serious non-attainment that they had to adopt RFG. So Louisville and Northern Kentucky were not, they were declared moderate, so not severe, not one of the worst non-attainment for ozone. So they were not required to be into that program. But to take advantage of the reduction of VOC and NOx, at that time, Governor Jones opted in to the RFG program. That's the reformulated gasoline. So Louisville and Northern Kentucky both had those programs from 1995. Northern Kentucky removed the RFG requirement, started the process in 2017. It's For Northern Kentucky, the process was a lot easier. They are attaining the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for ozone. The current standard is 2015 ozone standard. It's 70 parts per billion. It still wasn't an easy process. We had the multiple steps that we had to go through to remove the RFG in Northern Kentucky. The RFG areas currently include all of Jefferson County, portions of Bullitt going down to Shepherdsville on the map here, and up to LaGrange and Oldham County. And then a little bit more detailed map here so we can look at Oldham County. You can see Buckner and LaGrange, Crestwood, Pewee Valley, and then Bullitt County. My grandmother-in-law was from the Hillview area, so Hillview down to Shepherdsville. And then the annual cost comparison, and this is throughout the whole year. You can see Clarksville, Indiana, across the river from Louisville, the highest prices there. Cincinnati, the blue line, the next highest, and then Louisville in the middle with Bowling Green and Lexington and Covington below it. And then the ozone season cost comparison for Covington, Cincinnati, and then the surrounding area of Louisville. It was only a requirement for to burn ozone during the ozone season. So ozone forms, like I said, in the presence of sunlight. So this summer so far, where it's really been hot, a lot of heat, it makes ozone form more rapidly. So with that in mind, we have an ozone season where you have to take more precautions to reduce ozone formation. And so you can see the price comparison just during the ozone season, so April to September here. And the cost differential in the corner here. All right. Since Kentucky's opted in, there have been gasoline has gotten better over time, just from federal policies, the Energy Policy Act 2015. The EPA Tier 2 gasoline sulfur standards, CAFE standards, gasoline and vehicle emissions have gotten less over time. So really the question that I'm sure you get quite a bit is, can RFG be removed? And it's a multi-step process. For our Northern Kentucky area, it took 15 months to do that, and they were in attainment of the ozone standards at the time. So put this out here just on its individual slide. It's more difficult to remove if you're in a non-attainment area, and the hard part is you have to have reductions from other sources. So you can't just get rid of it. You have to find other sources that you're going to reduce NOx and VOC emissions from. And I know that was a little quick, but I'm happy to answer any questions, or Rachel can go ahead with the rest of hers first. But, yep, I will be happy to.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to follow up with Michael's presentation and talk a little bit about the Clean Air Act and the redesignation process and how ozone and its impact is being dealt with in Louisville. Next slide. So we all use a general kind of graphic where we show that nitrogen oxides plus volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight during our ozone season, which for Louisville runs from March until the end of October, forms ozone. It's not a directly emitted pollutant, but as Michael said, it comes from this mixture.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could she have the microphone closer to your mouth, because I can barely hear you.
Thank you very much. Better? Okay. So when we have NOx, those nitrogen oxides, that comes from combustion of fuel. whether it's fuel from a vehicle or fuel from an electric generating utility or other emission source. And volatile organic compounds range from both industrial sources all the way up to the hairspray I used this morning before I came here. This bowl of spaghetti that you see there is actually the equation for ozone formation. And it is that complex. It is driven not just by those sources, but also very much by the weather. And I know everyone hates it when it's both hot and muggy, but it actually scrubs ozone out of the atmosphere. So if there's any reason to be happy about a muggy day, that's it. Next slide, please. The Clean Air Act, at its core, is a public health strategy. Ozone has public health consequences, and that includes increased asthma. It essentially will give you what some people describe as a sunburn to your lungs. There are also environmental impacts from high ozone. Next slide, please. As you'll see, the Clean Air Act is a continuous improvement program. As Michael mentioned, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards are set, and then Congress requires US EPA to come back and review the most recent health-based science. And when that science says that there are still public health impacts, they require a lower standard, and then leave it to state and local air pollution control agencies to develop the plan to reach that next level. And you can see from our graph, as that standard has changed over time, it's been a challenge for Louisville. Next slide. One more. So the Clean Air Act, again, tells us what we need to do. In 2018, Louisville and Northern Kentucky also were designated as marginal non-attainment. That's the lowest level of ozone non-attainment. The steps that you see on the slide here are steps that we've already taken, with the exception of that last that says attainment deadline. For marginal non-attainment areas, we were to have demonstrated compliance with that new standard of 70 parts per billion using a 3-year design set from 2018 to 2020. Neither Louisville nor Northern Kentucky were able to make that demonstration, although both areas, I'm very happy to say, are currently meeting that standard. Next slide. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us in 2 places. One, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in the next slide, is that Louisville and Northern Kentucky, through the cabinet, have prepared our requests for redesignation. So put a pin in that for just a moment. But at the same time, the Clean Air Act tells US EPA that we missed that deadline in August of 2021 with that 2018 to 2020 design step, and it requires them to propose bumping our area up to moderate non-attainment. Now that opens up some additional tools in the toolbox. It allows for more stringent controls on emission sources, such as electric generating utilities or industrial sources of those nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. But it also, that's what you'll see there when it says racked rackham. If you haven't observed, we're creatures of acronyms around here, but that racked rackham is reasonably achievable control technology and reasonably achievable control measures. We have a plan, once EPA finalizes our bump up or reclassifies us to moderate, that'll be due to them in January of 2023. And then if we continue to be in moderate non-attainment, then by 2026, there is a requirement for those areas bumped up to moderate to actually implement a vehicle emissions testing or an inspections and maintenance program. Next slide. So that's kind of the uncomfortable news. The better news is this. If we are redesignated to attainment, then our planning and other requirements for moderate non-attainment cease. They stop. Currently, the Cabinet for Northern Kentucky and Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control District for Louisville, Jefferson County, parts of Bullitt and Oldham, as well as 2 areas across in Indiana, Clark and Floyd County, which is why that comparison to the gas prices in Clarksville is important, because they too have a gasoline requirement to lower ozone. We've each publicly noticed our requests for redesignation. The Cabinet's public comment period ends on July 27th. Our public comment period ends on the 29th. And after that, that proposal goes to US EPA. Once it's approved, then we are designated as attainment. That's a good place for us to be. And with that, I think that's my last slide.
Okay, we do have some questions. Senator Yates.
First of all, thank you both for being here. This is a very common discussion for my district representing Jefferson County. My father used to work in Rubbertown, and I was listening to slides, and I was talking to my colleague a little bit some of the history about how some of this was implemented, and the RFG came in place before the STARS program and whatnot, and how that since then there's been some major changes there, especially with the LG&E and everything else going into it. So I'll see how that may affect it. My question to you would be, of automobiles, the RFG, the automobiles, what percentage, to the best we understand, does that correlate to the ozone damage that we have in Jefferson County? And then looking into it, if we're looking at potentially a 15% increase in electric vehicles in the next 2 years, how that may positively impact. At the same time, comparing it to will there be any additional particles because of the electric grids that are being proposed. So I know all those kind of come into play because you just gave me a graph of what we're planning on, but the presentation before shows that we got some major changes happening in that area. So I just want to make sure that's all complemented to kind of look together as we plan for the future to move ourselves away.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. So from an emissions inventory standpoint, from point sources like those Rubbertown facilities or electric generating utilities, the point source to mobile source NOx emissions, it's about 1/3. When we look at volatile organic compounds from those point sources to mobile sources, it's about a half, but we have a tremendously high amount of non-point source volatile organic compounds in Louisville. What we've done here at APCD to better understand ozone formation, again, it's that spaghetti dish equation, which is really tricky. We did an ozone formation study a number of years ago to really dial in to see what our driver of ozone formation is. And for the most part, our area is sensitive to NOx. So controlling those nitrogen oxide emissions is really important for us. With respect to LG&E, for the third year now, we have an agreed board order with them on a voluntary basis, but it's still enforceable, that they will optimize the use of their controls at Mill Creek and also Cane Run, which switched to natural gas, in order to limit the amount of nitrogen oxides formed. So that's very helpful. We can kind of model that and see if that will help us reduce the amount of the potential for ozone formation within Jefferson County. But air pollution doesn't really abide by jurisdictional boundaries. And so we also know that we get about 30% of the nitrogen oxides coming into Jefferson County from outside of our area. So this is a very challenging control strategy that we implement in conjunction with the cabinet for the rest of the state and also with our partners at the Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM. Thank you.
Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's certainly good news to hear that you're working on a request for reclassification. Thank you for that good news today. I guess a question that I've heard the last several days and wanted to ask is the West Virginia versus the EPA. Would that have any effect on RFG, or is that mixing apples and oranges?
Well, I'll try my best on that one. I confess that I've been able to read the opinion once or twice and see some coverage of it. The amount of reductions that were expected under the initial Clean Power Plan, which was passed by the Obama administration, and then rescinded under the Affordable Clean Energy rule, we've achieved those reductions already. So we know that we've hit that milestone, I think, about 9 years early, and that's a very good thing for us. I think that on a going forward basis, how that actually implements, The work is yet to be seen.
One other thing you mentioned, and probably one of the most unpopular things ever in Jefferson County, you mentioned the vehicle emission testing. I think that was probably a very happy day for many, many, many people when that was eliminated in Jefferson County. So hopefully that discussion doesn't come back up again. But like I said, it was very unpopular.
We do a whole lot with our planning in terms of trying to manage ozone formation in order to avoid that designation. We think we have a good plan. This summer, the weather is something we can't control, and it has been a challenging summer already. So we have our fingers crossed that not only do we have an approvable request for redesignation once it gets to US EPA, but also that our weather breaks and we continue to have some milder, wetter, cooler days and less ozone formation overall. We've had several exceedances, but we've not yet exceeded the standard.
Well, I did represent part of Jefferson County some time back, and I think those constituents I did represent would say no vehicle emission testing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Bratcher.
Thank you. You know, this is not a remark against any one of you two. I think this RFG thing has been the biggest scam that this state has ever seen. Now, you go in with the governor in what year was it, 1990? And you can't get out of it. And here we are 35 years later, and the people have spoken. We've spent, how many resolutions have we done to get us off of this thing? Northern Kentucky got off, and that's great. And Louisville, now you say Louisville's about to get off, and hopefully we will. But I just am real disappointed in the government as a whole, is the way this thing is set up. And I didn't catch your answer to the Supreme Court change. Is that going to affect this program? And I have other questions, and I'll be quick, Mr. Chairman.
I don't believe it will, in terms of what the Supreme Court answered was a very narrow question as to whether or not US EPA could regulate the greenhouse gas emissions from existing electric generating utilities under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. So it was a very narrow question. It's one that is kind of moot, candidly.
Okay. Cane Run had coal power facilities at one time, and now it doesn't, right? Now, how could a whole smokestack operation come down, but we're still on this RFG? 'Cause how many smokestacks or coal-powered plants are there in this district that somebody created here?
So within Jefferson County, we had two coal-fired electric generating utilities. We had Cane Run, and we also have Mill Creek, which is currently still a coal-burning facility. They were required to make changes to their facility to comply with other parts of the federal Clean Air Act, in particular the Mercury Air Toxics Rule and also the sulfur dioxide National Ambient Air Quality Standard that changed in 2010. When Michael mentioned that we can get rid of RFG if we can replace those emissions with something else, those emissions that we can use to replace RFG have to be quantifiable, enforceable, permanent, and surplus, which means if they're used to satisfy another part of the Clean Air Act, we can't double count them and they wouldn't count for getting rid of RFG.
Well, I'm talking about how can you take down an entire coal-fired power plant but still be on this? Did that not reduce the NOx and the VOx and all that?
It certainly has reduced the nitrogen oxides. And
what year was that closed, do you know?
So Cane Run converted to natural gas at the end of 2015, and then Mill Creek also did about another $1 billion worth of additional work on Mill Creek in order to meet the Mercury Air Toxics Rule and the SO2 rule. That was mid-2016.
Did we go down in attainment numbers during the COVID years, the 2 years? I mean, there were times where nobody was on the road.
We did see both I'll separate those out. From a mobile source standpoint, we did see a reduction in mobile source emissions in the very early part of 2020. But that actually rebounded by summer with the exception of some early morning transit. And then it was back up to normal levels right quickly. With respect to electric generation, one thing to keep in mind is on this graph, you'll see there that in 2013 to 2015, we went from green to orange. That represents the change in the National Ambient Air Quality Standard.
Now, who changes that?
US
Congress?
EPA.
Unelected U.S. EPA changes it?
So the Clean Air Act requires, best way to think about the Clean Air Act is that it is a continuous improvement plan. And under it, Congress charged EPA for these 6 criteria pollutants with setting that National Ambient Air Quality Standard. And then every 5 years, Congress charged that same EPA with going back and reviewing the science to
and they
determine.
keep going lower. The standards keep going lower. So once you get into this finger mouse trap, you can never get out, right?
Well, at this point, we have a standard that went from 72 parts per billion in 2015 to 70 parts per billion. US EPA has kind of come out with their initial review of that 2015 standard to say, at this point, we're going to keep it at 70 parts per billion. And so it fluctuates, it changes, but it is based on public health. And so that is what they're aiming for, is to go ahead and continue to improve public health.
I'm almost done, Mr. Chairman. This is for you, Mr. Kennedy.
I'm actually enjoying it.
Thank you, guys. Mr. Kennedy, is RFG cost more than regular gas? You had some graphs up there.
So yeah, RFG does cost more than conventional gasoline.
Do you know how much? Somebody said 32 cents average.
Well, I think when you're looking at a refinery where they're producing it, I know it's not that much. It's more in the 6 cent range. Now, what you're getting at a retail gasoline station when you fill up, there's so many factors that go into that. I can't tell you what.
So,
what the
but it
difference
does
is there.
cost more.
It
So
does
the
cost
people in my district and Tom's and Representative Miller and Yates, they're paying more than other places in Kentucky to achieve these attainments. Yes, ma'am.
There is a difference, and Michael's right. Based on conversations with US EPA's Office of Transportation and Air Quality, it's about a 6 cent difference, 5 to 7 cents. But over the summer and, in various times of the year, we track gasoline prices to see what's going on in the marketplace. And right now, candidly, gasoline is less expensive in Louisville than in Covington, where they use conventional gas, and it has been since the start of ozone season this year. So I'm not sure what that's about, other than we can't really tell what the marketplace demand is when we look at the gas prices at the retail level.
The last question is Miss Hamilton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hamilton?
No, I'm afraid not.
You're a scientist, and I appreciate your answers today. But here's my question, and this is no reflection on you. What can I do? What can the state of Kentucky do, Jefferson County, Louisville, what can we do to eliminate your job? The Air Pollution Control Board. How in the world can you get rid of the Air Pollution Control Board, and who does it work for? I know you ask it if it's a federal board, a state board, a quasi board, a local board. Who runs that thing,
So,
and how can we, in 3 steps or less, get rid of it?
We are a creature of Kentucky statute. We were
Well, that's
enacted
what I thought.
under KRS Chapter 77 in 1952, although the district has been improving air quality since the mid-40s. Is something they started out as a smoke commission. So in terms of how the Clean Air Act works, it is unique among the environmental media, air, water, or waste, and that it specifically calls out and gives equal footing to local programs to develop the plans in order to reduce air pollution to meet those national ambient air quality standards.
And I have a bill to dismantle that. So I did know the answer, but I have heard that there is serious ramifications if we passed a bill like that.
The district has in some respects, what the district manages in terms of the number of sources and the complexity of our airshed is really very similar to the amount of sources that the state of Wyoming regulates. It's a very small geographic area that is a manufacturing driver in terms of the sources that are there. I sometimes get asked by our economic development people why our air quality is different than Nashville. And if you can find me another jurisdiction that has 2 automotive assembly plants, had 2 coal-fired electric generating utilities, now just has 1 really large one, plus a natural gas-fired electric generating utility, Rubbertown, and the state's largest wastewater treatment plant, then I'm hoping there's another similar jurisdiction out there. But it is a unique environment to work in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is our next question. I've just enjoyed the conversation. I'd like to have you all at dinner some evening and listen to all this discussion. Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and
See if
all
you can
the
top that.
Oh, yeah, all the entertaining questions and answers. And these, I'm going to ask 2 questions real quick, and I'll let you guys answer, and it, in whatever order. But I have a curiosity: is how much of the country, if you're aware, is using RFG or required to use RFG gas in population, not in area or anything. There are districts that are required to do it in population, roughly. And then the second question is somewhat related to jurisdiction and things we've been talking about. Any of the science around ozone protected or ozone designated areas, and whether or not it moves or affects, for instance, something outside of the area that's targeted into suburban areas, and I'm talking about certain more crowded population areas like mine in northern Kentucky, and even into rural areas. And there's a follow-up with that question is, what are some of the numbers that we might see in some of the most rural parts of Kentucky as far as 70 parts per million as opposed to what we see in some of the urban parts? Sorry for those 3.
I'll jump in there and say that the state of California and much of the Southwest are required to use reformulated gas. So from a population basis, there's a large number of the population is covered by having to use reformulated gas. So with respect to ozone designation and how a non-attainment area may impact an area nearby, when there is a new standard, that National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS, is passed, we go through about an 18-month process to properly define the area. And that starts out with the state actually proposes, based on our understanding of the population, the sources of pollution that are there, in fact, the type of pollution. Ozone is rather unique, again, because it's not directly emitted from a stationary source, but it comes from that combined nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. And actually, in some areas of the country, those volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, are actually a lot of biogenic. So places, for example, where they have a lot of pine trees, that terpene is a volatile organic compound that can really impact ozone formation. So we start with the state, looking at those sources of pollution, the type of pollution, the population, and then making a recommendation to US EPA. It's not as easy as we think it should be here. There's a whole lot of work that goes into modeling and being sure that we are finding the area that is most impacted to protect public health. EPA then comes back with either an agreement or they go through their own process where they might reject a finding based on their analysis of those same factors. And they come out with a technical support document, and you can actually see where they take into account, say for Louisville, the traffic that we get from residents in Indiana who come to work in Louisville, Oldham County, and what that impact, even though there are not that many industrial sources there, what that may mean within our area. We also understand that for Clark and Floyd County and our portions of Oldham and Bullock counties that are part of our metropolitan statistical area and our ozone non-attainment area, that we have sources in Louisville that are differently managed, those stationary sources.
Yeah, my last question was, do we know what some of the readings that we are getting in rural areas is? For instance, the standard had dropped from 0.8 to 0.72 to 0.7 now.
As far as the specific readings so far this ozone season, what I do know and what we really track is how many are over the 70 parts per billion standard, and it's rare for us to have an exceedance of that standard in a rural area. Does that answer your question?
We even see in Louisville, though, sometimes during the summer season, ozone levels as low as 53 parts per billion. And I think that would probably be quite comparable to what you would find in a rural area. A lot of it comes back to weather, and in Louisville's case, geography. We actually have, mountains kind of around us. You don't really see them, but we are in a valley, and that traps air. And when we have hot, dry, stagnant air masses that kind of come and sit over the city, that's really problematic for us. So you get out into other rural areas, a little wider open, you lose kind of that geographic bowl. You can see some pretty low ozone.
I know during the winter, in our lab, which would be just ambient air, we were seeing 35 parts per billion.
Okay, last question is Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hamilton, I appreciate getting some clarification on Senator Higdon's question on the West Virginia situation. My understanding, there's three pillars in that in the Clean Air Act, and one of which deals with the reformulated gas, and the other one deals with happening to West Virginia about fixed facilities and so forth. But one particular aspect of that decision, when I was talking to the LRC staff, was very, very knowledgeable, and I appreciate their insight, dealt with economic impact, economic studies and so forth. So how do you justify, or how do you look at, or what's your thoughts on the economic justification for reformulated gas in Louisville in relation to that court case?
So there are two different provisions of the Clean Air Act that we're talking about. We are looking in that Supreme Court case at the U.S. EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gases. Where there is explicit direction to EPA, the rules are a little bit different. And so in this case, while RFG is not as cost effective as it was when it first came out, because gasoline as a product has become more refined. We're on Tier 3 gasoline now, and that's taken up some of the advantage. Our primary goal at the moment is to bring the area into attainment, because if we're in non-attainment and bumped up to moderate, we will have to add on those additional controls, that racked RACM, reasonably achievable control technology, and reasonably achievable control measures, and that will include additional control for Kentucky utilities. So that is a price we'd have to take into account. The other thing to keep in mind is that inspection and maintenance vehicle emissions testing program.
I'm sorry, you're speaking softly.
I'm sorry, is that VET program. So our primary goal this summer is to bring the area into attainment. And once we reach that attainment, then we can have an opportunity to evaluate removing RFG at that time.
And that will take place, assuming that happens, in 2026, did you say?
The
or
vehicle emission testing program would be in place by 2026 if we're bumped up to moderate. If we're redesignated to attainment, that's off the table. So for us in Louisville, the primary goal this summer is to see the area redesignated to attainment. That puts us back on a clear status quo playing ground. And at that point, removing RFG would be something we could evaluate.
okay, it appears to me that this whole process going back to Governor Jones and the decision to opt in has been basically an alphabet soup. You're trying to figure out which letter goes with what situation in order to get your ultimate situation, and it seems like it's never been perfected because there's 26 letters in the alphabet and there's an infinite number of solutions. And so it seems like, and I concur with with Representative Bratcher on some of his observations, that it's rather frustrating to go through. They're trying to play a game with this, and I don't mean that in a derogatory standpoint, but in terms of trying to do this. One thing you mentioned in your presentation, and I come from more of a health perspective, and being a severe asthmatic when I was growing up, what data do you have that you can present that going through this process has reduced or improved any type of health situation when it comes to lungs, asthmatic, and so forth?
So I'll be happy to provide to Mr. Snyder a copy of US EPA's regulatory impact analysis for the 2015 ozone standard, where they do evaluate that public health standard. There are also, several other publications that I can share with you.
Have y'all performed any health analysis or data in order to see if that agrees with it or if it makes sense to you?
So APCD is a regulatory agency, and our mission is to be able to bring the area into attainment with that standard. That's our charge under the Clean Air Act and under KRS Chapter 77.
Okay, I would appreciate trying to find that information, because that's the underlying issue, I think, with public health. And if we're sitting there trying to play this game and there's no movement or no benchmarks being made, then what is some type of political ploy that we're doing? Which I hope it's not the case, and I like to think things are improving in doing that. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I misspoke just a moment ago. We do have one more questioner, and that will be the last one, is Representative Huff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to read a statement from the Air Pollution Control District as reported by WLKY. It says, based off of our 2019-2021 air monitoring data, the Louisville area is now meeting the national ambient air quality standards. And if that was the case for 2019, 20, and 21, what is kind of the problem, really, of getting it taken care of?
Could you go back a couple slides, Michael? Sorry. Let's get to where we're at. So the Clean Air Act, again, it's prescriptive. Keep going a little more. Prescriptive process. A couple more. We have the data that shows that we've met the standard. There are a couple of steps that aren't shown on this particular slide. We've had to certify our data for the ozone season from 2021. We completed that early in January. In Louisville, because we have the state's NCOR monitor, that's a multi-pollutant air monitoring site, we're required to monitor ozone year-round. So we have also early certified the full year's worth of ozone data. That took us a little longer because we had to wait until December 31st to get that data. There were other requirements under the Clean Air Act in order to get us to the point where we were able to prepare the request for redesignation. Both Louisville and Northern Kentucky have prepared our request for redesignation. We're out for public comment. There will be a hearing if one is requested. Once that's complete, it will go to US EPA. Once it's approved, they will designate us as attaining the standard. So we're in a good spot right now. We anticipate our public comment period ending on July 29th. If we have a public hearing, we have that scheduled for the first week of August. And shortly thereafter, it will go to our peers at US EPA. So we hope that we've worked collaboratively with them. There won't be any surprises in this submittal, and that we'll see a quick response from them.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's been quite informative. I know a lot of people's got an interest in this, and as we move forward, I'm sure there will be a lot more, but thank you for your presentation. Next on the agenda is the study report. It was emailed to the members on Friday and is also on the committee's website. So if you, just for your information, so if you want to peruse that at your leisure, you got any questions, you can ask staff. And our next meeting is Tuesday, October the 16th. I'm sorry, what'd I say?
You said October.
October, hey.
I wrote August, though.
He wrote August, I read October. I'm ready to get on with it. Is August the 16th at 1 p.m. unless we decide otherwise. And he says no. So with that, there being no further